Manning in a military brig, charging that the abuse is payback for Manning's alleged involvement with WikiLeaks. All that, and our freedom fighters, Charles Payne, Carolyn Heldman, Peter Suderman. The Federal Reserve is still going to print more money, ignoring Economics 101, and clearly ignoring these principles. That government is best which governs least. The people are entitled to a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. The Constitution was written to keep the government off the people's backs. Lee, Willis, Hunter, Payne, Heldman, Freedom Watch. The revolution continues now.
Tonight on the docket, the price of oil and the growing government debt. The bloody protests in the Middle East and North Africa have sent the price of oil skyrocketing. Oil is trading at a year-and-a-half high of over $100 a barrel, and consumers saw a 33-cent per gallon price jump at the pump in just 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the federal government continues racking up endless debt. Today it's $4 trillion, but by the end of next year, if the president gets his way, it'll be over $15.6 trillion. That debt is money you or your children will have to pay back. Our progeny will be born as financial slaves to the federal government, as they will have their wages taxed to pay for spending that occurred long before they were born. Yet the big government shakedown does not stop there. Part of the reason gasoline is so expensive is because of inane and unconstitutional government interference. You see, the government is sitting on huge reserves of oil. It places all sorts of nonsensical drilling restrictions on oil companies, and of course, it levies huge taxes on gasoline. In fact, from 1981 to 2008, federal, state, and local governments have collected $500 billion more in oil tax revenue than oil companies made in profit. So who is really gouging you? After all, this big government meddling in gasoline and debt means one thing, that gas costs more than it should, and our children are going to pay for the drug addict-like spending addiction of politicians today. But here now is a Tea Party-endorsed senator committed to getting the government out of the oil market, and it was introduced a balanced budget amendment. Utah Senator Mike Lee. Senator Lee, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you.
Before we get to the issue of oil, I have to tell you that I was surprised, happily so, at the number of senators who voted for the balanced budget amendment. It wasn't enough to get through the filibuster. It didn't reach the constitutional requirement of 2/3, but you actually had Democrats. We put their faces on the screen as we speak, Senator Lee. Coincidentally, Democrats up for election this year who voted in favor of making it unconstitutional for the government to spend more money than it takes in. What did you think about that?
Well, I thought it was wonderful. This is an indication of the fact that this is no longer simply a Republican versus Democratic issue. It's no longer conservative versus liberal. All Americans understand that we can't continue to spend the way we're spending, or else there's not going to be any money left for anything that people want to spend money on.
Now, you have told us on Freedom Watch, and you've told the wonderful folks from Utah who sent you to the Senate, that unless there was a serious commitment on the part of Republicans and Democrats, including the president himself, to support the balanced budget amendment, that Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, would not vote to raise the debt ceiling. Having lost this debate in the Senate, what do you do now? How do you vote on raising the debt ceiling?
I will vote against any effort to raise the national debt ceiling.
And how do you think you will be able to garner other senators, besides you and Rand Paul, to take that courageous but economically sound decision?
Well, I'm going to continue to remind them that this is something that's really concerning a lot of voters. Look, there were a lot of people who voted for TARP who later regretted it because the voters didn't like it. I think the reaction that voters are going to have to anything increasing the debt ceiling this time around is going to make what they faced in reaction to TARP look like a Sunday picnic, a walk in the park. Voters are going to be outraged. And the more I can get that message spread across to my colleagues in the Senate and our counterparts in the House, the better off we're going to be.
Are voters equally as outraged at the price of oil because the federal government is making it nearly impossible for oil companies to drill safely, say in the Gulf of Mexico, where a federal judge actually had to hold officials at the Interior Department in contempt of court because they refused to process applications for permits to drill. Do folks understand that the less drilling there is, the higher is the cost of the oil that we already have?
They do understand that, even though I think there are some in this administration who want to believe that the voters aren't smart enough to figure that out. The fact is, we are. And we are figuring that out every single day. Look, we spend about $500 billion a year as Americans buying oil from countries where a lot of people don't like us very much, and they're using that money to fund acts of terrorism against us in many instances. And, the debt problem and the problem with oil production are in many respects related. When we produce energy here, when we produce oil here, that revenue stays here, and that helps Americans. That doesn't mean that we have to categorically shun all products from anywhere else, but where we've got a commodity that everyone needs, like oil, in great abundance right here in the United States, we ought to be producing all we can.
How about...
This administration seems hell-bent on producing as little as we can here, and that's suicidal.
And I commend you for pointing that out, Senator. How about getting rid of the 18 cents a gallon tax on every gallon of oil? We should be paying money to the federal government rather than making oil and gasoline cheaper for the average Joe to put in his pickup in his car.
Well, look, that would certainly be one option we could look at. That money does go to fund highway maintenance and construction projects out there. I think there are other ways that we could get to very quickly that would help us to increase the supply, the domestic production of oil in the United States. That would end up having a really positive impact on the price of gasoline.
Got it. Senator Lee, we're going to have you back. I want to ask you about potential military intervention in Libya, but for another day later this week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Judge.
The big worry is Saudi Arabia. If unrest spreads there and isn't contained, experts say $5 gas, $5 a gallon, could happen almost overnight. What impact would that have on the economy now that it's shown faint signs of recovery? Here now with her answers is my colleague and friend, Fox Business Network's Jerry Willis, host of the Willis Report at 5 p.m. Eastern daily on the Fox Business Network. Jerry, it's a pleasure. Welcome here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Explain to us what causes the price of oil to go up here because of unrest 10,000 miles away, when the oil that's going up here has already been here and has already been refined into gasoline?
Fear. Frankly, fear over what happens to gas prices in the future, oil prices out of the Middle East. With all the conflict going on in that region, that sparks traders to push prices higher. We're always quoting futures prices. That's a look down the road at where prices are going. And as you know, it's all up from here.
Do traders, people professionally in this business, people in the business of getting the oil from Libya to Hoboken, do they believe that Colonel Gaddafi would retaliate against the United States by not selling us oil, or that the people who replace him would not sell the oil to us, or that the people now running Egypt are not going to let oil go through the Suez Canal? What exactly is their fear?
Well, that's just it. They don't know. They don't know what's going to happen next. It seems like anything could happen. The answers could be varied. So having no view on the future, you have to spark those prices higher.
How does the rise in the price of gas at the pump affect the economy in general?
Well, it's
pretty fundamentally.
Yeah, pretty fundamentally. Look, consumers are 77% of the economy, 77% of GDP, right? We're critical to economic growth here. For every penny rise in gas prices, that's $600 million in disposable income that goes out of consumers' wallets. It acts like a tax. The higher gas prices go, the less you have available to spend for food, for clothing, for anything else. And of course, as you know, other commodity prices are rising.
All right, funny you should mention tax. I think you were here when I was just chatting with Senator Mike Lee. Federal government takes 18 cents a gallon on gasoline at the pump, right out of your credit card or out of your cash or wherever you're paying for it. The states take between 30 cents and 66 cents. California, New York, Hawaii, 66 cents a gallon going to the states. The state is not performing any service or any function at that moment. You are simply voluntarily buying a good from an oil company. Would the states ever think of lowering it? Probably not. Do the people understand that so much of their money is going to the tax collectors?
No, I don't think people have any idea. And probably if they knew, they would be outraged. You're telling them today. Right? Look, this is burdensome for consumers out there. They're going to stop spending. This recovery is weak, especially as it applies to Main Street. Wall Street's doing okay. Big corporate American corporations doing great. We need to see Main Street recover.
Why is it that you think, I know this may be just a little bit off your expertise, the president rattled a saber earlier today when he said that NATO is seriously considering a military response. Does big oil want a military response, or does big oil just want stability no matter who's in charge over there?
I think they want stability no matter who's in charge over there. The president's played an interesting game over the last couple of weeks, being outspoken about what needs to be happening with Gaddafi, but on the other hand, not taking any steps to see that it's done. So it's unclear to me what kind of policy they're pursuing out of the White House.
All right, tell us a little bit about the strategic oil reserves. Where is it? What is it? How big is it? Who owns it?
Well, it should be something that we can tap into at any time. But can I tell you, what we really need to be doing is drilling. Come on. The president last week, he's appealing a judicial decision and putting everything on hold. That's where we need to go next. We need to be able to drill here, get the oil we can here, and be in control of our future.
I think that the environmentalists in the country and in the White House are using the BP disaster as an excuse to stop all future drilling, even though that was one of just 31 wellheads, the other 30 of which haven't leaked a drop, or at least a drop more than they're permitted to leak. And this federal judge, Martin Feldman in New Orleans, had to hold officials in the Interior Department in contempt because they wouldn't even accept the applications for a permit. Wouldn't the release of those permits lower the price of oil almost immediately, because it would dissipate some of the fear, even though it's years before that oil becomes gas?
Well said. I think absolutely. That would tell the markets that, yes, there's more supply coming, prices can come down. It would remove some of the fear that we were just talking about out of the marketplace. We've got a long way to go, and I think that the priority in the White House is green, green, green. He's choosing policy over people. He should be choosing people.
It's the Willis Report, 5 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday on the Fox Business Network. Jerry Willis, what a joy. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, as the violence in Libya escalates, what should the U.S. do or not do? Today, as you heard, President Obama gave a hint, and you might not like it. Find out what it is next.